the credit go to somebody else when you did this 17, 18 years old. So that kind of rubs you the wrong way. It rubs me the wrong way, you know?
The Blind Side. Now, it's ironic that a movie called The Blind Side would bring so many eyes, so much attention to one person. Now, even more ironic is that we wouldn't even actually see the actual story. Now, I'm talking about Michael Oher, the person that the movie The Blind Side is based on. Now, what we didn't see was his ability to persevere, overcome childhood trauma, make it in the worst of scenarios that most people would have folded in, and eventually become one of the top football players in the country, and then making it to the NFL. Now, what we did see was a family taking him in, this down on his luck kid who wasn't really going anywhere in life, and they made him be able to become who he was to make it to the NFL. Now, the outcome sounds the same in both examples, but we didn't get the full picture. Now, in light of news coming out that the Tui family actually had a conservatorship over Michael Oher that controlled his money and his likeness and image, that has made millions of dollars that he didn't see a single dime of, has made people look at this story as not such the heartwarming movie that it once was thought to be. And now that we know the bigger picture, what else could be going on here? I'm Nicholas Davenport, aka Mr. Mental Muscle. Let's break this down.
You know, you guys, if you get a feel for who I am right now, it's not going to sell too much. I've always talked this way. I've always been well-spoken. I've always went to school on my own. You know, ain't nobody had to save me, man. So will that sell in America, you think? I don't think so. So they got to do what they had to do what they had to do. But, you know, at the end of the day, man, it's about me being smarter now.
Now, for those who aren't familiar with the movie The Blind Side, it starts off with Michael Oher, who's a young black man living in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, it starts off with him being homeless, not having a consistent place to stay, trying to figure out when his next meal is coming. And he comes across a family, the Tui family, who takes him in and then eventually teaches him the game of football, using his big size to get him into school, and then eventually sign with Ole Miss, which leads to him going to the NFL. Now, there's a lot of different parts of this movie that are heartwarming. It makes you want to almost cry at the end because you see all that he triumphed. But the problem is, it didn't depict Michael's actual struggle himself. It came off as a savior complex. Some people even say the white savior complex, because it was showing them uplifting Michael, taking him to where he needed to be, and even teaching him to play the game of football. Now, there's some inaccuracies in that alone, because when they met Michael, he was already playing football. He's already a standout player. He also excelled in basketball and track. So it gives this notion that they just taught him everything he knows, dilutes who Michael was as a person. And I talk a lot about athletic identity on this channel, and you're taking away the fact that he was always a competitor, that he actually wanted to be an NFL player since a little kid, and he worked his butt off to learn the position of left tackle. And that's because the blind side is protecting the quarterback, who's typically right-handed, so they'll be able to block them from the people they can't see. So he really put a lot of work to become this. And like I said at the beginning, this dilutes what really happened, all that he had to overcome. Imagine you have a story made about your life. You're excited, you're ready to see it. And it turns out the whole movie isn't even centered around you. You're just kind of like this moving part that's in the movie, but it's more about the outside forces that helped you to be. Now, getting back to the point of how now we're finding out that the Tui family had control of a lot of things, it takes away from, was this really a heartwarming story? Because when I look at it from a psychological standpoint, we talk about childhood trauma. Trauma gets used a lot. What does it truly mean? We can talk about people who go to war, who witness tragedies, disasters. But when we talk about like a child, Michael had to go from foster homes. He had a possibility of his many siblings being taken away from him. His mom was addicted to drugs. He saw a lot before he even turned to age 12.
You know, looking yourself in the mirror when I was 11, 12-year-old kid, telling myself, hey, everyone around you is even in an even worse situation that you're in. So you're going to have to get up and do this thing yourself, and developing a routine right then when I could have given up at 11, 12-year-old.
So none of this is depicted in the movie. It alludes to it. We know that he's had some home life, but it really brings him off as this kid who doesn't know where he's going in life. He's not that smart. They kind of emphasize his intelligence not being that high. And Michael actually spoke out himself saying how, I just never had consistent education. Once he got consistent education, he made numerous academic achievements, and this takes away from the person himself, because if you're looking at a movie, you want to see how someone goes from the bottom to the top. You got to talk about these things. So getting to the trauma that he overcame, he saw a lot of things that a person, let alone a child, should not see. but he still made it. But we don't see this in the movie. They call it the blind side. We were blind to all the things he had to overcome. What we really actually saw in the movie was he had a hard life. He had the odds against him. He could have went to the gang life and the tough streets, but the Tui family came in and showed him how to play football. And there was numerous scenes where they made it seem as if he didn't know how the offensive tackle position worked, where they had to use the pieces of salt shakers and pepper shakers to explain it. And this is a little kid explaining to this big old guy who plays football in reality, but in the movie didn't show that. So it takes away the fact that not only was he overcoming that, he was a student of the game.
You know, you have to understand, before I moved in with the family, I was an All-American.
Like I said, talking about athletic identity, you have to be able to identify what you need to do to compete, to be the best at what you do. And he didn't just make it to the NFL because he's big. That definitely helped. Being big is definitely a big feature to have as a football player, let alone an offensive lineman. But the fact that they took away the point in the movie that he worked so hard outside of overcoming his life struggles and surviving day to day, because if you talk about just survival mode, we are always living in that fight or flight state. Our body, our brain is ready to be in a defensive position, and we overlook things that are important or need to be done. That's why he may have not done good in school. Because imagine being a kid and you try to pass a class, but you didn't eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner in the last 2 days. Hard to do that, but this is what Michael was facing. And like I said, we don't see this in the movie, and this is a problem in itself. But you might think, well, why did he get to say what he did in the movie? Well, going back to that conservatorship, they had the full rights to exemplify the story, which is based off the book that they wrote. And he was just, like I said, a figure in the book, but it wasn't really about him per se. Also, it was being put together and made while he was still in college. Now, this is for the NIL deals, so he couldn't even have input because based on the NCAA, that would forfeit his amateur status and he wouldn't be able to keep playing in college. And when he finally was able to go pro, which shows at the end of the movie when he gets drafted by the Ravens, movie is already said and done. So he really did not have a say in any parts of the movie other than just saying, oh, it's getting greenlit to be made. But it's not like the directors were asking him every day, what's your opinions or thoughts? He just had to see the finished product, which led to another issue because when he finally got drafted, his image in the movie carried over to the NFL. And now people are thinking, oh, can he really make it? Is he ready for this? There's a lot of pressure, a lot of eyes on the position. Typically, most people aren't watching football to see linemen. They want to see the quarterback, the receivers, running backs, and sometimes some returns, special teams. But that's the flair that we see in football. Most linemen you couldn't even name. But since he had so much attention on him, that's unneeded pressure. Also, how he was depicted in the movie, it made the sense of that maybe he's not smart enough to stay up with the game. Can he learn fast enough to keep up?
I think the biggest for me is, being portrayed, not being able to read or write. Second grade, I was doing plays in front of the school. And I think that's one of the, when you go into a locker room and your teammates don't think that you can learn a playbook, that weighs heavy.
And what's wrong with all this is what he was in the movie wasn't him. He had many issues with that because now people are making all these criticisms, all these judgments on something that wasn't even true. But that's the sad part about media, that once the media gets out there, whether it's social media, TV, in this case, a movie, is out there. And people are going to believe what they're going to believe. And that's something we call the anchoring bias, right? That's when you're giving the first piece of information and you run with it. For example, if I said, I'm going to sell you a car for $5,000 and you say, sure, next week I'll get the money. You come back next week and I say, no, what? It's $8,000. You're anchored with the $5,000. So your brain's like, why would I go higher? This is the first piece of information. Same thing with Michael Oher in this movie. If the first reason you heard of the name Michael Oher was The Blind Side, and you obviously don't know him personally, you're probably going to assume the movie's true. Not because you don't care, it's just how much thought are you willing to give to it outside of that? So your brain just makes sense of real time what's going on. But getting back to the point, this challenged him because how are you going to make it in the league where you're already being criticized before you've even taking a snap? And when you do get into the league, they're going to say, oh, if he's not playing well, he's not the celebrity, the star, or the player that we thought he would be, because the movie set these expectations. So when you look at that from even that standpoint, from the athletic performance, like how can he really excel? How can he really thrive in an environment when he had a family that was meant to take care of him, to help him? And I'm sure they did help him. I'm not saying they didn't, but under the pretense that he thought, probably not so much. Because remember, childhood trauma, he came from a family that was unstable. The mother was in and out of the house. He didn't know if his siblings were gonna get taken away. And he had so much thought and belief in the Tui family to be finally the family that he could have stability and maintain, and to find out years later that they too didn't have his best interest. That's gotta hurt. And Michael Oher is a grown man now, but just mental health, we talk about it all the time as a man, but as in general, it's a lot of factors go into it. He spent most of his youth trying to survive and overcome. He spent his young adult years trying to make it to the NFL. He spent later adult years trying to thrive in the NFL, and now he has to go through the backlash to find out the family that he trusted, another family that he couldn't count on. This seemed to be the narrative in Michael's life, but that's why I say he's definitely someone who can survive. He definitely is the embodiment of mental toughness, because not just did he thrive in his sport, his craft, he thrived in life where I say most people would have not made it this far. So this man deserves a hats off, and I hope the best for his situation, because when it's all said and done, even outside of the conservatorship and all the nonsense that's going on around it, and we're still finding out more information, it's the fact that this is going to live with him forever. How he was depicted will forever follow him. Now think about what that does to his mental health, not being able to understand why people don't treat you a certain way because you were depicted as someone who didn't know better. You're this big, dumb jock. You had to be taught how to play football. You had to be taught how to thrive in life, when actuality, you were the one doing all the work and making it all happen. So this makes you think more and more. Don't believe everything you see on TV, because just like I said, the story of The Blind Side turned a blind eye to the actual facts that makes Michael Oher who he is and how he gets his mind right. So make sure you think twice before you judge somebody in a book by its cover, and understand there might be a deeper story to all of this. So I'm going to stay up with this story and see what more might develop from it. But all in all, this topic, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to sports psychology, performance, there's so many factors, and Michael Oher's case really exemplifies it, because there's so much components, him as a person, him as an athlete, him as a grown man trying to find his way after a life that people didn't really do the best for him and kind of did things for their greater good. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, get your mind right.